and of course, David Swanson, Executive Director of World Beyond War and Campaign Coordinator at Roots Action and author of War is a Lie. David, go ahead and kick it off for us.
Thanks so much, Ryan. Great to be here at the teach-in. I'm going to share screen. What I was asked to talk about was this primer on foreign policy that Roots Action published some years back, and that we have updated and continued using the past few years. And the idea was actually to interject some discussion and some understanding of foreign policy into the people who do the foreign policy. We talked to so many incumbent Congress members and candidates for Congress who claimed not to know about foreign policy, not to have a good position on this issue because they don't know anything about it, don't feel it's their business, literally think it's not part of the job, or it's not for the House, it's for the Senate. I watched a video on social media today of Medea Benjamin questioning Congress members how they voted on sanctioning the ICC. And pretty clearly, some of them don't even know what the ICC is. I mean, so the ignorance is not completely fake, but it's largely fake, of course, because what they're hiding in having campaign websites, the vast majority of which don't mention the existence of foreign policy at all, is very unpopular positions. Peace is very popular, war is not. And the parties in Washington, D.C. have become a pair of enthusiastic war parties. Norman Solomon of Roots Action wrote a good article last month on the Democratic Party becoming a war party, and Matt Duss today in The Guardian, perhaps a little hypocritically given his own past, same critique. You've become an unpopular war party. So we created this primer as a tool for educating candidates and Congress members and being able to go back to them and say, now you're educated, what's your position? But it's a good tool for educating anybody else as well. It's very, very strange for Congress members to pretend to know nothing about and have nothing to do with foreign policy, because it's basically what Congress is for. It's the majority of what Congress does. It's not the majority of all spending, but it's a strong majority of discretionary spending, of the spending that Congress members have anything to do with, what they spend their jobs deciding what to do with each year. And it's likely to become much more. Joe Biden was demanding that NATO members spend 2% of their economy on military, and Trump had this new number of 3%. Now Trump says 5%. And some Congress members say 7%. And there's no logic to it. Somebody's going to say 9 or 10% tomorrow. There's no reason they won't. And the reason we go through all this in the primer, but the reason they don't like to talk about how many dollars it is, or what percentage of government spending it is, or how many dollars per capita it is primarily because then if you compare US military spending with other countries, it isn't even on the same chart. You have to roll out a whole, yards of paper to get the United States on the same graph with other countries. But if you talk about percentage of an economy, then you can talk about military spending shrinking even while it's growing and be in the same ballpark with some other countries. But to go from less than 3.5% to 5% or 7% of the US economy, and especially if you take it away from the non-military spending, there's going to be very few people still buying the charade that the US government is not principally a war machine with, some side affairs. Here's a bit of a comparison in terms of just weapons exports between the United States and other countries. The United States, exports more weapons to dictatorships and so-called democracies around the world than almost all the other countries put together. And you can say similar things about military spending per capita, about the size of military alliances and weapons customers and organizations like NATO, about bases, foreign military bases in other people's countries around the world. At least 70% of them are US foreign bases. Other countries don't really do that with bases. The United States is going to take over Greenland. Well, the United States is already in Greenland. It's already got bases there. It's already got bases in every single country around Panama except Panama. This is the U.S. world. It's nothing like the military affairs of any other country ever before or now. How do I get it to go to another slide? There has to be a way. We put this in to be somewhat nice to Congress members, that give them a little bit of an excuse for how bad they are. But it is true that they are always lied to. The lies are quite blatant and obvious, and it's a choice to fall for them. But they are lies. Peace is very, very carefully avoided in Ukraine. Peace is very, very carefully avoided in Gaza, and they know this perfectly well. But they hear every day, as we hear on television, other stories. We know that the United States is fueling a war in Sudan, and we have the Secretary of State this week come out and denounce a genocide in Sudan, while taking a break from sending weapons to a genocide denounced by the rest of the world in Gaza. Favoring Al-Qaeda is very, very bad in New Orleans, but perfectly good if you're taking over the country of Syria. So it's important to try to get Congress members, but also members of the public in general, to develop a little bit of healthy skepticism. What would be a decent foreign policy? What would be an actual Defense Department that actually defended anything from anything else? Well, you would invest money in something worthwhile. It's not much of a secret that you would move money from the war machine to environmental protection, human protection, instead of seeing, at least $50 billion damage thus far in California. You would have put that money into environmental protection before now, and you could have a Green New Deal beyond your wildest dreams. You could have a peace economy with education and infrastructure and retirement and health care for all, beyond what we dare dream of, if you took the money out of the counterproductive, destructive, immoral, illegal death machine. So there's my summary.
Thank you so much, David. Much appreciated as always. And we've sent that primer to all sorts of candidates, and only a couple of them have really appreciated it. And a lot of them have ignored us. But it's important they read that stuff. David, I do have a quick question for you, a little Q&A. You talk about going from 2 or 3% of GDP to 5% spending. That's what Trump wants all these other countries to do. Generally, does increased military spending lead to increased military using?
Yes, David Vine is an expert on the bases aspect of this, and I hope we'll hear from him shortly. But when you put more money into weapons and troops and bases and ships and planes and militarism, you get more wars. And the primary targets at risk in those wars are the bases that are supposedly defending against wars. It's such an upside down and evidence-free concept, but this notion that military spending isn't a sadistic evil to be cut back or eliminated, and isn't even a necessary evil based on supposed threats out there, but is a sort of public service. And the more of it, the better. And the richer a nation is, the more money it should put into it. And if you can dump 10% of your economy into weapons, how much better the world will be. Well, this is all based on the idea that the more you invest in war, the fewer wars you get. Whereas we have decade after decade of evidence of the exact opposite. Right? The more you invest in wars, the more momentum, the more profits to be made, the more the weapons have to be used up so you can manufacture new ones, the more they have to be tested, the more the threats and the hostility and the arms races and the mistakes and blunders and hurt egos are built up. You can't go putting weapons all around China, threatening China, and not understand that you're risking a war with China. It's basic common sense. A child can understand it, but a child hasn't been paid enough to not understand it.
Right. One more question. The Trump 2.0 administration, you asked Trump supporters, he was the peace candidate, and I don't think anyone's arguing that the Democrats were the peace candidates either. But there's all the talk about he's a peace candidate and start any more wars. He's going to get us out of all these wars. I don't think most of us believe that. But, we put this foreign policy primer together. We sent it all these candidates. Is there any of that peace stuff that you see coming from Trump at all, or is it a total mirage?
Well, people are much more interested in peace as random people and as voters than is led on by the corporate media. Peace is very, very popular, and people are desperate. And so people will go looking for hints of peace anywhere they can get it. And someone like Trump will feed it to them. Will say he's going to end the wars. We're going to have peace in Ukraine and Palestine before I even take office. And these are warmongers on the other side. His vice presidential candidate will say this stuff, even while they say the exact opposite stuff in the next breath. It's take what you want and don't hear the rest. But this is the guy who promised last time to end the war in Afghanistan, and then the general said no, and he saluted and didn't end the war in Afghanistan. This is the guy who openly threatened nuclear war, who supported military coups, who sent the weapons into Ukraine that even Obama, the guy hanging out there with him today in the National Cathedral wouldn't do because it risked creating a war. This is Mr. Kill Their Families. And this is the guy who wants to put 5% of everybody's economy, including the United States, into militarism. And he's not going to create peace in Ukraine. And his supposed master and loved one, Vladimir Putin, is saying, no, we're not going to simply end the war on your terms. He's not going to create, they're not negotiating peace in Gaza. They're playing with stupid journalists. That's all they're doing. The danger is how many wars he could start, including in Iran. The danger is the use of the military to go after our friends and neighbors in this country because they came from Central America. If this is a peace candidate, my God, what have we been reduced to? I haven't seen a peace candidate out of these two parties in my lifetime.